Hi, thanks for joining us here on KXAN Plus. I'm your host, Esmeralda Zamora, and our class is in session. Today we have our Kristen's Classroom segment, and we're joined by meteorologist Kristen Currie to talk all things avalanches. Kristen?
Good morning. Yeah, it's probably interesting. You're thinking, wait, you guys are in Texas, avalanches. Yeah. But that's one of the things I love about Kristen's Classroom is it's anything and everything science, right? And sometimes we even go beyond science. But unfortunately, this has kind of made some news headlines recently, avalanches in the West. So you know what? I was like, let's talk about it. While the weather is fairly quiet here in Central Texas, I think, there is a little bit of a piqued interest when we start talking natural disasters to begin with. So avalanches is today's lesson.
Yes, and we're in the peak of winter all across the country. Although we're not seeing super cold temperatures, I'm sure out in the mountains, in the hillier areas, there are talks of snow and possibly avalanches. But let's dive into it. What is an avalanche?
So yes, let's dive in. So Kristen's Classroom today talking about avalanches defined by the National Weather Service. As expected, an avalanche is a rapid flow of snow down a hill or mountainside. So that could literally mean, something that's big in scale, small in scale, medium in scale. But we define an avalanche as that quick movement of snow downhill pulled by gravity. And there are several different things we look at when it comes to avalanches, not only, the factors that go into causing an avalanche, the triggers of an avalanche, but also safety. So I first wanted to talk about factors. As a meteorologist, what are we looking at ahead of time that could potentially give us a heads up as to an avalanche risk? Well, the timing of the storm, right? A long duration storm or a storm that comes on fast and is very intense could all make a mountainside more susceptible to avalanches. Snowfall rate, about an inch per hour or faster. That onset of snow being so quick can sometimes cause an avalanche, and even temperatures. And that could be something like, a storm that gets warmer as it stays, or even clouds overnight that keep temperatures up a little bit. Sometimes that wetter, more slippery snow is going to slide faster. So those are kind of the things I'm looking at. I will tell you, as far as why I'm talking about this is because the National Weather Service's most avalanches that are, something that we can recognize. There's avalanches that happen all the time in the woods that we have no, way to actually know about. But those that trap people or worse are caused by people. The National Park Service said that too. The majority of avalanches that involve people are caused by people. Most of these unintentionally, right? It's not that we're going out there with dynamite and causing avalanches. Sometimes, DOT will do that, but this is mainly people, I think, not realizing or not knowing their environment, realizing that some hillsides, some mountainsides can be more susceptible to avalanches than not. So knowing the slope, the National Park Service, and I have all this research on my weather story or my blog, my Kristen's Classroom blog, if you'd like to know more about how I got here. But the slope, they had said, usually 30 degrees or bigger, so steeper, they start to worry about the risk of potential avalanches given the right environment. Snowpack, right? How quickly has that snow packed down, or how much snowpack do you have? The triggers, like I said, most of them involving people as far as what's causing that avalanche, but also tying back into the factors. How much snow have we had recently? What was the temperatures yesterday or overnight? Those kind of all tie into avalanche factors, things that we are looking at. And I say we as in meteorologists, but there's actually avalanche centers too in many of the western states that will put out daily forecasts for this. And they kind of rate it as low, moderate, high, extreme, right? These risks of seeing avalanches in certain parts of the high country. We can kind of circle back to safety, but Esme, it's interesting because, yes, does Texas get avalanches? No. Why are we talking about this? Many of us, and I know you included, take trips up to the mountains, and we ski and we snowboard. So it's important that we talk about it now before we go into these trips, before we get mountainside. So that way, if something does, heaven forbid, happen, we know, I remember Kristen talked about this one time of what I need to look out for.
Well, I'm glad we're talking about it now, because if I would have known this when I was up on that mountain, I would have been even more terrified.
Right. And, when it comes to specifically the ski resorts too, just from skiing and boarding, and I know from skiing and boarding, oftentimes the resort will let you know. They'll say, this part of the mountain is off limits. There's a high avalanche risk, or they encourage you to ski within bounds. That's a big kind of, there's front by or some of those back bowls. That's, I think, where we tend to run into more issues when skiers or boarders or snowshoers aren't following those outlined outer bounds that they do maintain and basically the maintenance goes into reducing the susceptibility of those avalanches.
Yeah. I definitely saw a bunch of people doing that, exactly that, going off of the trail or going even higher. So, and up tempting. In the mountain, it's like 30 degrees. So you could see how steep it is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so I just think all those are kind of things to look for. I don't expect, the general public to realize, okay, it's, 35 degrees today, but it was 45 degrees yesterday. My advice to you would be to just simply throw in wherever you're going, Montana Big Sky Resort, and type in what their avalanche center is and look for those alerts. Like I said, more often than not, the ski resort would let you know. But I also think it's interesting because when you say most avalanches involving people are triggered by people, you're thinking, wait, what? You know? It could just be the slippery slope, right? Fresh snowfall on an ice base, something like that.
Or a recent storm.
A recent storm, absolutely. Something else I kind of wanted to talk about were the warning signs, because I actually didn't know these. This is new for me. The things to look for if maybe you are out on the slope and for whatever reason didn't check the avalanche risk that day. Sliding snow. So if you've got eyeballs on an avalanche, that's an obvious one. But also evidence of previous slides. And this could be something, as simple as you see some smooth, soft snow and all of a sudden it gets kind of rumply, right? Yeah. It looks like a blanket got rumpled up at the bottom. That would be evidence of a previous avalanche. And sometimes that's a good cue of, oh, okay, we could see avalanches on this side of the mountain. Cracks in snow around your feet or your skis.
That's scary.
Yeah, that says skies, but that I think was... right? Skis, I think, is S-K-I-S.
Yes, S-K-I-S.
But it was just a habit of mine to write skies. Skis is what I meant there. Hollow ground under your feet. So if you're walking and it sounds hollow, that could be some
walk away.
Exactly. That the ground underneath you is unstable. This was something that I found interesting, too, was the National Park Service had said, look for a whomping sound when walking.
Yeah. A whomping sound?
Yeah. And I don't know if it's because they're looking for maybe the sound of that hollowness too, that womp, womp.
Like when you're looking for a drywall anchor or something.
Yeah, when you're trying to put a nail in the wall. That's actually a good idea, a good analogy too. Like we talked about, heavy snow and rain in the last 24 hours, especially if you've gone quite a few days without heavy rain and snow. If it's like an icier base and then all of a sudden you've got that fluffy, dry snow on top, that could obviously be something to watch for, just the forecast. And then significant warming. Like I said, clouds overnight. This is something we talk about on TV all the time. Yeah. If you have clouds overnight, more often than not, those clouds act as a blanket and keep the temperatures up overnight, a little bit warmer. A warm wind here in Central Texas, that would be a west wind for us. Let's say you're up in Colorado on the eastern slope there. So the leeward side of the mountain, a warm wind or a downslope wind would be a warming wind. And then obviously just a temperature difference too. So these, again, kind of tying back to being mindful, being aware of some of the things ahead of time. So if you do take your next ski trip, you know what you're looking out for.
Prep before you head out to the mountain, right?
Yeah,
absolutely. Jumping back to the safety portion of what you were talking about, it sounds like you said that these are mainly man-made or human-caused. Sounds just like a wildfire, right?
Yeah, wildfires for sure are unfortunately caused more by humans than anything else. You do have lightning-started wildfires, you know, wildfires that unfortunately happen just naturally, but most of them don't. Most of them are humans, and that, again, falls into the unintentional versus intentional. There is, unfortunately, a high number of wildfires caused by arson, but especially here in Central Texas, what I've noticed in the wildfires that I've covered in my 6 years here, they're not intentional. A lot of the times, a chain dragging behind a truck, parking on dry grass, something like that, a prescribed burn that gets out of control. Unintentional, but unfortunately with very big consequences when they do get out of control. But avalanches, I think, are just so rare, relatively speaking, that a lot of people just have no idea what they're looking for, what to do. You asked me about safety. There were 3 things that the National Park Service had recommended if you are going to be out skiing or boarding. A transceiver, so that's basically something that has your GPS, that has your location on it, that you keep attached to you. So heaven forbid something happens and you do get buried, that transceiver will let others know where you are. A shovel, and I'm not talking about a big garden shovel, but just a shovel, a small enough shovel where you can carry it with you. And again, heaven forbid, have to dig yourself out. And then a probe, that would be for others in your party. So, like a ski pole or an actual probe that they can stick into the snow and, look for somebody who might have gotten buried. Those are the 3 things to carry with you.
And let's talk about what these avalanches look like. When I think of an avalanche, I think of a cartoon with a big snowball, shuffling more snow under and growing. But what do they really look like in real life?
It's not necessarily exactly like that, but it's like a landslide, but of snow, right? You start to see the mountainside move, and all of a sudden some of the trees will bend, and you start to see the big cloud, the big snow drift coming down. That would be a big one, right? Mm-hmm. But sometimes these are little, and all it takes is a shift in snow underneath you to really panic, right? Yeah. To realize, oh, I'm not moving anymore.
The ground is moving. Yeah.
And it is something that I in my time in New Mexico, we talked about avalanche risks a lot. It's interesting reading more about this today in anticipation of this lesson, that they had said the southern slope was more susceptible to a little more rocky. But there's a fine line too, because if it's a slope and you've got vegetation here, some big trees and bushes and hills, sometimes that'll slow it down. The friction of those trees will slow down an avalanche. Whereas if it's completely clean snow, a solid base, it would only further enhance the snow, right? The momentum of that snow would have nothing to stop it. But this is something that I was reading about that unfortunately trapped some snowboarders in Washington State this season, in California this season. And California is having an incredible winter so far. I mean, Mammoth, if you're familiar with the area, Mammoth ski resort picked up 10 feet of snow with one of the recent snowstorms.
That's a dream. That's a dream to ski on.
Yeah, I mean, this is the first time in what I read 30 plus years that the entire state of California has been drought free. I mean, they have just gotten walloped by these atmospheric rivers, these big snowstorms. And as amazing as that is, especially for an area like California where a lot of their water supply comes from melted snow, just like areas in the desert Southwest, there's a lot of, I think, beginners or maybe those who are just unfamiliar with the hazards that snow and so much mountain snow can have. And this would be obviously avalanches, one of those big ones. Yeah.
And there's a photo in your article that I wanted to ask you about. What is this photo?
Yeah, you see underneath when I was looking at different avalanches that have been recorded and reported. This was actually out in Peru, and unfortunately, they did find a mountain climber from the United States, and a little grim, but he was mummified there. Wow. And they found his body and they returned it. But this was back in 2024, so about a year and a half ago that they found this mountain climber there in the high country of Peru. There's a couple more up top if you want to scroll, Esme, of other avalanches that I had found. This was snow debris, so some of the trees there that they found last year too. This is in Montana. And then there was one a little further up that also, unfortunately, was people started and people impacted there, where those 2 men are standing there kind of on the left side.
In that little valley.
Yeah, right there. They had found a snowshoer. So the snowshoer, 2 of them, one was buried there, and you'll notice the tracks on the right side. Those are from the first snowshoer right there, exactly. So obviously you were never encouraged to ski or snowboard or snowshoe by yourself. You're always encouraged to have a buddy with you because of this instance of if heaven forbid one of you does get buried, you're encouraged to
point it out and remember.
Mark a place, of where you last saw that person. And then I'll finish up our lesson here with this last slide of, this is worst case scenario. I know it's scary to think about, but what happens? What happens if you get caught in an avalanche? And this is one of those things where, do I expect you to ever need this? No, but there is always a chance. There is always a chance. And I want these things to be running through your brain if you ever do find yourself caught in an avalanche. You are encouraged to discard all of your equipment, right? Let go of your poles, let go of your snowboard.
Your skis, take those boots off.
Swimming motions to try and keep yourself up top of the snow and not underneath. Work your way to the side of a slide. And by that, I'm talking about, they say a rip current is the same way. Don't swim, right back to shore. Swim parallel to shore to pull yourself out. Same thing with an avalanche. You want to work your way to the side and not just wait till you hit the bottom. Hands in front of your face to try and give yourself a little bit of a gap to breathe between, your nose and the snow that might be coming at you. And the big one, which is obviously easier said than done, is trying to remain calm, not panicking. You can scream and try and get the attention of others in your ski or snowboard party, but I think it's more important that your hands are over your face and you're making sure, if for whatever reason you can't get those swimming motions done, you're doing what you can to stay up top of that snowfall as much as possible.
And calm, like you mentioned.
Calm. Yep.
It's crazy to think that something as small as snow can cause so much damage.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talked mainly about just people impact, but I mean, you've had instances where avalanches have buried towns, right? When they're so intense. And one of the things that plays into this is climate change. Our world is getting warmer. In fact, I was just reading this morning that the 2025 in the record books, the fourth warmest for the U.S., third warmest for the globe. So we are up there on record, right? That we are top 5 warmest we've ever been known to humans. So it's interesting to think, so what are some of the implications of that, right? A lot of people, our brain goes to summertime, hotter summers, right?
Yeah.
More 100-degree days. But you think about some of the impacts that we see in other areas of the United States, not only the increased risk of avalanches for people who do have the sports play, right? But also less snowfall, wetter snowfall, right? The stickiness or the slipperiness of some of the snowfall, all of that would be tied into changes induced by a changing climate.
Yeah, and we're used to it here in Central Texas, but all around us, everyone is feeling the difference from last year's winter to this year's winter and expecting what we're going to see this coming winter, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting reading some of the forecasts from the northeast part of the U.S. this week. They've got the potential for a developing snowstorm, and they can't wait because it's been such a dry start to winter for them. So they've had a slow start to their snow season, as has the Rocky Mountains. I mean, today's Wednesday, most of last week, Denver was in the 60s.
Wow.
I mean, those are normal temperatures for us in Austin, Texas, right? For the Mile High City to be looking at
spring for
highs
them.
in the 60s in January, great to be outside, but obviously not great for the ski resorts or the tourism that they rely on in that state to bring the boarders and the skiers up. So there is absolutely right. Like you said, impacts everywhere with climate change, but there are different impacts. And that's, I think, what's important is you're not going to be affected the same way, in Austin, Texas versus Denver versus Miami versus New York City. They're all going to be different in different ways. And we know with research that unfortunately some of the lower income populations are more affected first than some of the higher income populations. So
yeah, you have to think about the people that work those ski resorts. They're not going to have a job that winter if there is no snow.
Yeah, and it's something that I think is a little bit, it's not talked about a lot, but it needs to be talked about. People think, big ski resort town, very lavish and bougie and millionaires and stuff. But in my time in New Mexico, you have some generation after generation families who live in the valley of Angel Fire, Moreno Valley, next to Angel Fire Resort, because it's beautiful, and they've been there for years and years and years, and maybe they aren't in that, private jet income tax bracket, but they're being impacted just as much as that guy in the private jet trying to ski down Angel Fire Resort. So it's such a complicated, messy issue, and there is a policy side of it, and that's sometimes the worst part is when politics are involved. But my focus is the science, and we know with the change in climate that avalanches become more an increase in frequency that we know of. Thousands happen all over the world in wintertime that we probably don't even realize, but people impacted avalanches will increase with a warming climate.
Yeah, and we can't do much about climate change, but we can do something about staying informed, knowing those safety tips and signs of an avalanche. And for anyone that is interested in reading up on that, you have your article on our website, KXAN.com, and it talks about everything. Pretty much.
Absolutely. And like I said, I'm very aware that you're probably not going to run into an avalanche driving down Mopac, or out in Burnett County. But I'm hoping that this kind of resonates, that this sticks, or maybe you're just a science geek like I am and you want to know more about these natural disasters, quote unquote, natural disasters, natural in the fact that it can happen naturally. But like I said, those triggers are us. I think it's super interesting to kind of learn more about, in the case that you may need this information later.
Yeah, if you go on a trip or something like that. Well, Kristen, we have reached my favorite part of our episodes, and that's our classroom visits. Who did you visit this week?
So I have two. One actually was a visit to me. Aww. I had some Girl Scouts in studio last week. They're from Liberty Hill, which, it was interesting. They were with me on Friday, and I said, did you guys skip school to come here on Friday morning? Liberty Hill ISD is on a 4-day school week.
Wow.
So they got to do, something fun on a Friday on a day off that I think a lot of other students, obviously wouldn't be able to do. So these brownies, I had some juniors in here and a cadet. They joined me in studio for a weather talk. We talked about STEM education, how important that is. I was a former Girl Scout myself, so I'm very partial to the Girl Scouts because I've been there. I've been in that vest. I've done the crafts, I've done the camping with them. And then yesterday, I went to Baranoff Elementary, talked with their kindergartners. Baranoff Elementary is in South Austin ISD. So this is their kinder team. And this, I believe, is my third year visiting Baranoff. So kindergartners, obviously, they've got some fun questions, fun stories for me, and it was a lot of fun talking with them yesterday about Central Texas weather.
And what was one of the questions that stood out this week?
Oh, girl. So there were two that I mentioned on air. So the first one, we talked about, tornado safety, where to go if there is ever a tornado. And we talked about, a downstairs closet would be a really good hiding spot from a tornado. And one little boy raised his hand and said, what if the tornado, it breaks my closet? What if the closet gets broken? And I said, after a tornado, and if we know that, things get broken and things, people might need help, our police officers and our firefighters will come out and they'll knock on your door and they'll make sure you're okay. So if they see maybe some of your roof is gone or the door is damaged, they'll come in and they'll say, hey, is everybody okay? And they'll make sure that if you are in a broken closet, you don't need help.
That's a good question.
Yeah. And another little boy, in response to that, asked, well, what happened if my clothes are ripped? And I said, the police officer and a firefighter will help you. They're there to make sure you're okay. And he asked, will they sew them for me?
I'm sure they'll give you a blanket.
Yeah. I was like, they might just find a new shirt for you. But I like where your head's at. They will make sure. And I think it was a good segue to the importance of first responders, of making sure we appreciate how much they do for us in those scary moments, and making sure that we tell the firefighters, the police officers and all that when the coast is totally clear, so they know when they can go in and make sure that everybody is okay. And then my last question that I thought I just got a kick out of, this little girl, we were talking about flooding, and I said, if you're ever in the instance of a flood, when the puddle outside starting to come inside, you want to go up in your house. You want to go upstairs, you have an upstairs, attic if you have an attic, roof if you got a roof. And a little girl raised her hand and said, I once went upstairs when there was a flood downstairs. And I said, perfect. That's exactly where I want you to go. Mm-hmm. And she told me, the toilet downstairs flooded. And I was like, okay, that is, and I said,
good practice.
That is exactly where I would be. If my downstairs toilet flooded too, I'm going to go upstairs. And so it just was so cute because they get it, right? They're connecting the dots. I have too much water downstairs, I go upstairs, you know, like, oh, what happens if I'm in where I'm supposed to be in that closet and a tornado comes and my house gets hurt? What happens next? The firefighters and the police officers will come in and make sure everybody's okay. So, you know, they're kindergartners. They're at this point, it's spring semester. So most of them 5 years old, 6 years old, and they're getting it. And I love to field those questions because sometimes they're quite creative.
They're building safe habits.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's one of the things that I stress so much in every school visit that I do is safety. We talk about how to stay safe from lightning, tornadoes, floods, hail. I mean, all of it, right? Yeah. So one day, it's kind of like the avalanche conversation. One day, if you might find yourself in the case where there's a tornado warning or there's lightning outside, I want this conversation to be in the back of their minds thinking, oh yeah, that one weather lady told me to do this, you know? And it could be, you know, what decides between you getting hurt, not getting hurt in the case of dangerous weather.
That's right. And would you bring the avalanche topic up with them at all?
Kinder, probably not. They do kind of hit me sometimes with the tsunami questions. I think we've talked about
earthquakes.
That before.
Yeah.
Earthquakes and tsunamis are a very hot topic with the littles. And so we'll talk about that. We do talk, you know, about natural disasters elsewhere. Volcanoes also comes up quite a bit. But it's also why, and I was just talking to one of our new weather interns this week about it. My background, my degree is in environmental science. I took geology, chemistry, biology, oceanography, and meteorology. And that broadness of science, I think is, you know, it's invaluable to what I'm doing right now. I didn't just learn about meteorology in school. Not that that's bad. There are several, you know, meteorologists on TV where their background is solely focused in atmospheric science. But the fact that I was not forced, but, you know, required to take all those science classes, I love. Like, I tie into that and I tap into what I learned in college so often. Things that I never thought I would talk about on TV, you know, earthquakes being another one. That's not something that in Austin, Texas, I lay awake and I worry about, you know. Yesterday, we talked about the Pompeii volcano. So Mount Vesuvius volcano that buried Pompeii. But, you know, things like that where I'm so glad that I had, you know, for whatever, you know, destiny set me on that track to pursue all of those sciences and not just the one, to be able to go into a school and talk about volcanoes and earthquakes and avalanches and tsunamis.
And answer all the questions, right?
All the questions, yeah. You know, it's interesting with the littles, they're more like that, like worst case, Armageddon, the world is ending scenarios. The older kids, more high school, they want to know, like, how much money do you make? How do you do, like, does somebody do your hair?
That's good to ask.
And, yeah. It's more... it's way more about like the other things and not the science. But listen, I'm there to teach. I'm there to be transparent in what I do every day and what's important. So I've definitely learned along the way how to answer some of those tougher questions.
A range of questions from all these schools.
Exactly.
Well, we're excited to see more throughout this year before we get into summertime and we have like a downtime of school visits. But bring them all every week you get.
Going to the Girls School of Austin. I'll be heading to tomorrow. So you get to hear about their questions next week.
Exciting. Well, thank you for joining us here, Kristen. And we'll see you next week.
See you then.
Thanks everyone who is watching at home or wherever you're watching for joining us here. Again, I'm your host, Esmeralda Zamora. If you'd like to see more conversations just like this one, make sure to download our KXAN Plus free streaming app anywhere you get your streams on your favorite TV app store. It is free to download. And don't forget to check out our website for the latest news, weather, and traffic updates. We'll see you next time.